put this social on because you guys have questions about research. You guys have questions about the essay and the thesis. So we thought what better way to get these most commonly asked questions answered is to get you all in one room and to have the professionals answer them for you. Starting from the far corner, we have Professor Scott Oliver. We have Professor Glenn Millhauser, Professor Seth Rubin, and Sara Sanchez, Coordinator of Undergraduate Honors and Research Opportunities. Let's give them a big hand for being here, guys. Yep, so we want to honor your time, so we're going to jump right into it. Thank you.
So I want to know first, thank you all for coming. I mean, this is great, and we get a lot of questions about how do we get into a research lab, and Justyn kindly put this together for us all, and so we're going to go through some of your interests, questions, and so forth. But I'm just curious, how many of you are straight chemistry majors? I want to get a sense of the feel of the audience. Okay, good pot. How many are BMB? Ooh, about 50-50, so you guys are going to have to arm wrestle later. And how many are other majors, like BME, MCD? Okay, all right, good. Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. We're more interested in entertaining your questions, and a lot of them come up. But as Justyn pointed out, the faculty, our staff, graduate students, we get questions all the time. Folks want to go into research labs and get some real hands-on experience. And that's a great thing, and it's one of the things that's actually unique at UC Santa Cruz. We have a significant number of our undergraduates going into research labs, getting great experience. It helps, you learn a lot about yourself in terms of whether you are destined to be a researcher. Do you enjoy, truthfully, the struggle of being in a laboratory? Do you enjoy the long hours, working with other people, that sort of thing? Sometimes it can result in meaningful results. Sometimes it even leads to publications, which is fantastic for your future plans and so forth. Oh, and as the timing would go, this might hold interest for some of you. I just got an email today from one of my former students, a woman named Lauren Crother, who, and I recognize, by the way, some faces from Chem 1A and 1B, which is good to see. She was in my Chemistry 1A class probably 5-6 years ago. She was a terrific student, very hard worker, did great work, ended up doing research in my lab. And I'll touch on this later, but there's many, many labs to choose from. Okay, so you don't have to go to just your intro chem instructors. But she did terrific work, graduated with very high GPA in BMB, Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, worked in biotech for a couple of years as she was sort of getting her life sorted out, wanted to be a physician, and seriously, just today I got an email from her that she was admitted to medical school. So we're very, very excited for her. She's a terrific person, and nothing like seeing great young people on pathways like that taking on very important occupations to give you hope for the future. So anyhow, so some quick pointers. So a few things, some of this may be obvious, but let's just touch on each one very, very quickly. So first of all, if you want to be a researcher, it is a significant time commitment. And I think you guys understand that. But so a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, do well in your classes. And I say this, and we all say this, not because we want to put a speed bump in front of people to hold out people who may be, not quite at a certain GPA. And we don't really look at least I don't look at strict GPAs themselves. Do you want me to move the mic? Okay. It's more that because research takes a lot of time, if people are struggling in their classes and barely passing, and then all of a sudden now they have a new obligation of putting in 10, 15, 20 hours a week in a research lab, it can push them over the edge and they'll start not passing their classes. And we as faculty want to see you guys doing well. So the foremost responsibility to yourselves that you have is to do as well as you can in your classes. If your classes are going well and you're having it's okay. If you're doing fine, maintaining your GPA, and it's a reasonably high GPA, then you're usually in pretty good shape to start shopping around. Number two, students often come to us as faculty, and that's fine. We're happy to talk to you guys, but TAs, get to know your TAs. If you are in a laboratory class or in a secondary discussion and your teaching assistant becomes impressed with how you are intellectually engaging the studies that you're taking on, and that TA can see you as somebody they can partner with, that oftentimes is a pathway. And truthfully, most of the students that come into my lab come in through the TA route, not directly through me. And oftentimes what will happen is, well, what we usually do is we pair up undergraduates with graduate students. The undergrads aren't working by themselves, at least not initially. They're paired up with a graduate student. The graduate student benefits by having a helper along with them, a colleague, somebody they can mentor. It helps them develop their mentoring skills. But then the two of you work together. And then in most promising cases, the undergraduate student will then split off and start working on their own project once they get the lay of the land in terms of how the lab works, the technologies, the concepts, and so forth. How far do you have to go as an undergraduate? Again, every laboratory is a little bit different. For my lab, I always want to see people at least get through 1/4 of organic chemistry. And there's a couple of reasons. One is we do, in a sense, you can think of it as biochemistry. And biochemistry uses the language of organic chemistry, so we need people to be familiar with how organic chemistry works. Also, organic chemistry, working with organic compounds, they bring in a different level, as you can imagine, of toxicity, care and handling, and so forth. Chemistry, modern chemistry laboratories are very, very safe, but it's in part because of the laboratory infrastructure, but it's also because people are properly trained. And you need that training through organic chemistry to work in most of the labs. When to start looking? You know, and this kind of is in line with taking organic chemistry. It's a good idea to start looking late in your second year, early in your third year. If you come in halfway through your fourth year and you're on a 4-year schedule, that really doesn't leave you much time to get trained and get rolling in a lab to where you can get meaningful results. And so that usually won't work. On the other hand, just like I was saying before, if it's too early, you know, you're in, I don't know, chemistry 1B, it's too early. Okay, you need to give it a little bit more time and get further along. You want to finish the intro chem series at least, and as I say, get started in organic chemistry. Study the faculty research interests. So you might think of us as, you know, chemistry and biochemistry faculty. There's I think about 25 of us, something like that. But in fact, one of the things that we do, and again, this is rather unique at UC Santa Cruz, is the chemistry faculty, the MCD faculty, the BME, biomolecular engineering faculty, the METOX, which is microbiology and environmental toxicology, we all work together. We share instrumentation. Students flow in and out of all of our labs. We even have a joint graduate program that we call the Program for Biomedical Science and Engineering. So you are fully free and entitled to look at all of our sketches, okay? Look at all of our research, and I encourage you to do so. And so instead of looking at simply the 25 faculty in chemistry, this expands out to something like 80 to 100 faculty. And so there's a lot of great research programs to look at. So be imaginative and study what the different faculty are doing and try to match that with your own interests. And that's my final point there. So consider chem, MCD, METOX, BME. So oftentimes, students begin with an email to the professor. So this is kind of meant as a joke, but this is not too far from what we sometimes see. Hey, professor. Don't call your professors by hey, okay? Dear or hello or something like that, okay? Some of us are more sensitive to that kind of thing than others, but nevertheless, notice the different font. So clearly this student has drafted one letter that will work for every single professor on campus, and they're just pasting in the different names. And we do get emails like that. I am interested in working in your lab. I've studied your research web pages. Bad grammar, okay? Really bad way. Can I meet with you to talk about doing my thesis, da-da-da-da-da. So you get the idea, okay? This is a bad letter. What happens in most cases when a faculty member gets a letter like that, they hit the delete key and it's gone, okay? So this is not, you want to be a professional. Okay, and I recommend this not just in terms of approaching faculty for working in their lab, but for anything that you want to do, interacting with each other, interacting with your teaching assistants, interacting with faculty in general in your classes. Be as professional as you can. You're going to have to do this one day when you are professionals after you've received your degree, so why not start now? So I dug back to a student's email that really stuck with me for many, many years, and this was from a student who worked in my lab probably starting 6, 7, 8 years ago. And this letter just had pop to it, okay? It's short, it doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be a long expose about all the things that you've done leading you up to this various point in your life. This one is just, it's scholarly in the way it's written, it's professional. She very, very quickly describes what her major is, where she is in terms of her degree, what her interests are, who she's contacted in terms of, you know, what elementary research she's done to find out what labs might be good for her. And I make some of these points down here. So brief background, well written and sophisticated, contains a reference contact. She motivates her interests and addresses the specifics of why she wants to be in the lab. And so if you just read it, I'm a beginning 4th year MCD major who transferred to UCSC. Oh, I bumped my elbow. Actually, I should read it from up here. I spoke with Manny Aries, jumping halfway through, about following this route, and he pointed me in your direction. After reading about your work with prions and recent PubMed publications regarding alpha-synuclein, which is a protein involved in Parkinson's disease, but you get the idea, okay? There's not a wasted sentence in here. There's not something that's overly informal, and it's informative, okay? And because she had contacted one of my colleagues, many of you may know Manny Aries. He's a colleague in MCD biology, very accomplished fellow. I emailed Manny and I said, hey, what can you tell me about her? And he said, she's fantastic. You know, she's really dedicated. She's hardworking. I got hold of her transcript because we want to make sure that folks are in good academic standing. It looked really, really strong. She came into the lab. She did some wonderful work. And anyhow, it was great to host her research. So I think, so this is how you want to approach. Okay, so I will stop there. And do we hand it over to you now? Sure. Okay, so at this point, I'll hand it over to Scott Oliver. And then Scott's going to talk about the senior essay, and then we'll take your guys' questions, if you want a pointer. Just tap. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Glenn. So what I did is I saw some of your questions that were sent to us, and I took the instructions that are on the website and just kind of reworked it a bit. Some corrections to make on there, but largely the information's on there. I recommend the first step is to figure out what you want to do your essay on before approaching a faculty member. So what I'm finding is students are bringing more than one topic these days. So find two or three. I think the website says 3 or 4, but I think 2 or 3 is enough ideas on things that you're interested in based on well, what you like, but what courses you've taken as a junior or a senior. So students that are doing senior essays are usually in their last year, so they take more courses. And the first question I always get is how to find ideas if you don't have any in the first place. And that I always point them to news, but not mainstream media, but scientific news. So the early pages in any edition of Nature or Science has new things that are happening, and pretty much any issue that you open up, you're going to find something that's going to be of interest. If not, go to the next issue, no matter what area of chemistry you're interested in, or biochemistry. And then another one is chemical and engineering news. So the first pages in that highlight things that are exciting things that are going on, and that's another good place. Web of Science, SciFinder Scholar, I point those out. You may have used those for lab courses in senior year, but if you're in the early years, you may not have. Those are general search. I mean, Google Scholar is just as good, but Web of Science, the university subscribes to, as well as SciFinder Scholar, where you have to make an account. But that's to search the literature in general. So you're going to get very broad hits on those search engines. And so I recommend the first 3 ideas, the science news, unless you have some topic that's you're very interested in the first place. In either event, you want to find a paper on the topic that you want to write about, at least one. So when you approach, on the next slide, approach faculty member, you want to bring a journal article with you, or at least the news article that you find in Science or Nature. And one thing I mentioned here is that you can also find a review. When you search Web of Science, you can specify a review instead of a journal article in general. Those are a summary of a research area and summarize a bunch of papers together, and you can specify that in Web of Science or SciFinder. So I recommend that as the first step. Then you can go, as Glenn mentioned, go to the website and see what the research interests are of the faculty. So based on what you want to do your essay on, then you can choose the faculty sponsor is the order I would put that in. Look at their website, read their research description, and you may not be used to reading papers yet, but at least check out their titles of their papers and maybe get a couple. And yeah, if their interests match, one general question, how to approach them. Email, certainly doable, a good email, as Glenn points out. It depends on the professor, I would say. So some are more open to dropping by, but they all have office hours, and email is the most common. And so when you, how do you go back, Glenn?
Just swipe it.
Yeah, I've got an iPad too. Okay. Yeah, one thing that I'm impressed with students come is to bring written notes with them so that they've looked at your research, not just show up. So some students just email, I'm interested in inorganic chemistry, like period. So I just got one yesterday for the essay. Be more specific, have some areas, and try and tune it to their research. Be familiar with their research when you email them, and hopefully when you get an appointment to come talk to them. Yeah, you can attend their office hours, make an appointment. Bring written notes, so that's always impressive. Somebody's actually got something written down, maybe a printout of a paper or two of the professor's group that they published. Bring hard copies of the three topics that you want. So certainly be familiar with them, but it's good to have a printout of them so you can show the faculty member, and then they'll help you choose which one based on your mutual interests. Yeah, we'll help decide which topic. And then the rest of these are more just enroll. Once you get your faculty sponsor, enroll in Chem 194. And then what follows after that is, do you write the essay about one paper? Some faculty prefer it that way. Myself, I like it to be a research area, so you go to Web of Science or SciFinder, find a bunch of papers on a topic, and write an overview of that area with a lot of references. So that you work that out with your faculty sponsor. And so before, don't just write it and then send the full draft. I have them start with an outline. So this depends on your sponsor. But I tend to do a point form of what the sections of the essay would be, and send that by email. And then you agree on that with your sponsor agrees on that. And then after that, through the quarter, you should meet with them a couple times, drop by, at least email, and send them a partial draft. Depends on what they want. Maybe they just want the full first draft. But one thing I wanted to definitely say here is that the website implies just send the full draft at the end of the quarter, and that is not a good idea. So what you want to do is get them a first draft, a complete draft, by week 8, I put, but it depends on your sponsor. So some want it halfway through. You want to have time to do revisions. So that's the most common thing where we all forget who we're sponsoring by the end of the quarter, and then exam week comes and they say, I'll get you my first draft by the day after finals. And that's not the way it's supposed to. The final version is supposed to be done by the end of classes. So you would have jeopardy of not being sponsored then if you haven't gotten your first draft. I'd say by week 8, but work that out with your sponsor. Yeah, and the revisions may take several iterations. You may have to pass it back and forth several times before they say, okay, now it's accepted, and they'll sign off on the cover sheet that you then do online now. So one good thing about the essay is it's electronic. The last stages, the signature sheet, you used to have to physically go and get a signature, take it over to the registrar, I think it was, but now it's electronic. So people leave town after exams often. Yeah, some would leave town without getting it signed, but so now it's all electronic, and that helps the last steps. But yeah, so that's just an overview of the steps involved, and I'm sure you're going to have questions.
Justyn, are we now Q&A? Sarah? Oh, good.
Okay. Hello, again, my name is Sara Sanchez, and I'm the coordinator of undergraduate honors and research opportunities. And I work with all undergraduates on campus. I'm not limited to students in your department specifically, but no matter what your college is, I'm a resource for you as far as talking through these different steps related to getting involved in undergraduate research. So I'm actually really happy to hear that basically what your professors have been saying are what I usually tell students as far as steps to getting involved in research. So if you need some additional coaching or motivation, or just want to even just reassurance that you're taking the right steps, you're doing the right things to try to find these opportunities, you can come speak to me. I do appointments throughout the week, so not necessarily set up office hours, but you can contact me or find me in Slug Success to do appointments. And along those lines, I also do some workshops in case you're part of any student organizations who might benefit from an introduction to undergraduate research workshop or something else related to professional development for students with your interests. You can get in touch with me for those types of opportunities as well. Something that I'll mention, and perhaps others can chime in during the Q&A, is that in addition to getting involved in research in labs on our campus, there are opportunities to do what is called summer research at colleges and universities throughout the country. So if you have a summer or a couple of summers coming up your way, this might be a way for you to get involved in research as well. So again, maybe we can talk about that a little bit more. What I have for you, I do have a couple of resources. This blue flyer here is directing you to the undergraduate research website and database for the campus. It covers, again, all disciplines and topics. There's a lot of good tips in here, including additional example emails to professors. Actually, the good, bad, and ugly ones are there as well. As well as a database. There's a database on this website that lists close to 100 different opportunities. They aren't, though, they're not unique, let's say quarter by quarter opportunities, like an opening here, an opening there, and a lab. The opportunities that you'll see in that database are for ongoing programs that usually operate on a regular basis. They have students apply to them, submit materials, do things like that, and occur regularly, right? They have a schedule. So that's some of the information that you'll find on the database, and I can leave these flyers at the back so you can grab one before you leave. And then the other one is Preparing for Undergraduate Research resource, again, to keep yourself reminded of the things that you need to be doing that are smart to do if this is the type of work that you want to do. The first one on here is related to academics. Get good grades. It's not going to hurt you in trying to seek out these opportunities, but as was talked about, we want to make sure that you can handle, right, the experiences of working in a lab, essentially in dedicating time to that experience as well. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say right now. As you guys have questions, I'll be able to chime in on some other things.
All right, so now's an opportunity for you guys to ask any questions now that you've heard from our professors and from Sara.
Are you holding the microphone? You want us? Yeah. Okay. We'll get it up here. Let me just mention real quickly. I realize we talked about two different aspects of undergraduate engagement as in their more advanced years. One being research in a laboratory, the other one being the senior essay. Is it clear to you guys the distinction between the two, or do you want me to discuss that real quickly before we get into it? Yeah, okay, some heads are nodding, okay. So what I was talking about was working in a research laboratory. What Scott was talking about was doing a senior essay. What this maps back to is UCSC has what's called the Senior Comprehensive Requirement. So in addition to completing all of your courses with passing grades, there's also a final senior project that every student, every UCSC student in every single major has to complete. Different majors do it in different ways. If you do research in a laboratory and you want to use your laboratory work and what you've discovered and what you've learned and so forth as your senior comprehensive requirement, you can write a senior thesis, okay? And that thesis is then reviewed by your advisor, usually as well as by a couple of other faculty members as well. Not every student does research in a laboratory, and that's absolutely fine, okay? People are on different pathways, and there can be good reasons for this. People might want to go into, the legal aspects of science, patent law and so forth. You don't necessarily need laboratory experience. For students that don't do work in a laboratory, or for students who work in a laboratory but don't want to write a thesis, they can do what's called a senior essay, and that's what Scott was talking about. And the senior essay spreads out over about a quarter or so, about 1 quarter. So it's a 1 quarter engagement. So it's a very, very different level of time commitment, but both of them involve your own scholarly intellectual input. So if your time is more pressed, if you're a dual major, if you don't plan to do laboratory research and so forth, you want to do a senior essay, then you follow the path that Scott was describing. Okay, does that clear it up for everybody? Yes.
So for senior theses, they span across the entire year. So what happens if you can't find a faculty member to sponsor you by the first quarter, because then you'd end up being late? Do you take a good summer to be your third quarter, or do you have to take an extra year?
So in a case like that, we hope that almost all, there's no guarantee of course, but we hope that almost all students who really want to be in a laboratory will ultimately find a place to land. But because you're looking for a research laboratory much, much earlier than you would be planning your senior essay, okay? If somehow at the, in your second year or it's by the end of your third year, you haven't landed in a laboratory and it's getting to be too late, at that point you can do the senior essay and you still have plenty of time during your senior year to do it. And we are happy to take any and all of your questions.
Going off of the senior thesis, for those of you who do complete a thesis, you can submit that to a competition called the Deans and Chancellors Awards. It's something that you're working on for your senior requirement. You don't have to do additional work for it, but the Deans and Chancellors Award happens every spring. The deadline is usually in early April. You submit your work, you submit your mentor or faculty mentor's name so that they can approve your work, write your recommendation as well. And then there's different levels of awards. You can get, if selected, a $100 Dean's Award, an additional $500 Chancellor's Award, or the campus also selects one outstanding thesis from all those submitted for an additional $1,000. Yeah. The Senior STEC Award, yeah.
Could you maybe describe opportunities for funding?
Okay, so opportunities for funding. And in my experiences, the funding comes along once you're, in this case, I'll just say you're in the lab or you've been accepted to the lab, you're about to be in the lab. That's when I see more funding opportunities available. One source of funding potentially for you is your college. Various colleges, I know, for example, Merrill, Crown, that's where my office is at Merrill, so I'm in that neighborhood. That's how I know things closer to them. But they each have funds. I know that colleges 9 and 10 does as well. They have student project funds or student research funds. You can apply to those, explain about your research, what you're going to be doing, how it's going to benefit you. So look into your college. Another source of funding that will be available at least one more time on our campus is called the Corrett Undergraduate Research Scholarship. That's KORET. That provides students $1,500 in the form of a scholarship, an additional $500 just for research funds, and then $500 for the faculty sponsor as well. And those research funds, they could go to supplies and materials. You could also, allocate some as a stipend to yourself or hourly wage or something like that. Because for the most part, research opportunities on the campus, unless there's a funding source, I've seen that they're on a volunteer basis for your experience. Yeah. So the PBSci Undergrad Award, does the department have any funds? The PBSci, yes. How about chemistry?
Well, also in some cases, especially once you get going and if you've been in a lab for a while, sometimes the faculty member that is mentoring you will have funds through a grant, for example. Usually faculty aren't willing to pay you right away. Usually you start off as a volunteer, but there are examples where that happens. And that's important. One other thing that I'll mention is a really good time to do research is during the summer when you don't have all of the obligations of your classes. So it's definitely worthwhile at least one summer to stay on campus and work in a lab that you've been working in, because you'll just see when you don't have the time commitment of classes, you can really dive in and take advantage of the training opportunity.
Speaking of the time commitment, it's not a job, right? It's volunteer. And I'm just wondering, I know it probably depends from lab to lab, but what typically is a weekly commitment?
I think this can vary from lab to lab. I tell people that 15 to 20 hours is generally needed in order to get something out of it. It's hard to get something out of it. It's hard to get trained. It's hard to make progress on a research project if you're only kind of dropping in a couple of hours a week. So we all recognize that's pretty challenging during the school year. That's why I mentioned the summer. You definitely want to try and do it during the summer if you can. At first, it tends to be volunteer, and you just have to figure out how to make that extra time. As you progress, there are opportunities for it to be your job and receive a stipend. And then, I don't know, maybe Justyn can chime in too, that you can also take it for credit. So you can enroll in, I forget the number, but
Chem 199.
yeah, so Chem 199, even before you're writing your thesis, you can for a quarter take Chem 199. You can take up to 5 credits. The expectation for 5 credits, I think, is 15 hours a week. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So 15 hours a week is 5 units. So you can think of it that way. And a lot of students end up doing that after they volunteered for a little bit.
Question back here.
So I'm reading through the biochemistry requirements for graduation online. And it says students must satisfy the comprehensive requirement by receiving a passing letter grade in any of the senior exit labs, but are encouraged to write a senior thesis or senior essay. Could you elaborate on that encouraged? Like, what is that strongly like? Yeah, I guess could you just elaborate on that, on the wording of that encouraged?
I think it's exactly what it says, you know. Many students who, you know, if students do, again, who do not, so chemistry handles it differently than biochemistry and molecular biology, and you've highlighted one of the differences. So in chemistry, it must be a senior essay, and Justyn, you can set me straight if I'm wrong on any of this. But in BMB, they have, to some extent, gone on a slightly different track, and so they use instead a senior laboratory. And what will happen is you will, I believe, because I've signed off on a number of these, but a student will come in and work in a laboratory, and we will just have a coordination between whoever is setting up the laboratories for that quarter, and we'll sign off that yes, the student did quality work, and that satisfies the comprehensive requirement. But what they're also saying is that, you know, BMB is really has the degree itself has many laboratory components to it, as does chemistry. And so they feel that if you have any inkling towards going into a laboratory life, laboratory research, that this is a great time to try to get involved in senior thesis work. And then the thesis through 199, getting credit that way, and then writing your thesis satisfies the requirement.
Okay.
Satisfying that, the senior exit lab for B&B can't just be a I did research lab. There is a specific one on that list that you can choose from, and it does require an application and 2 different signatures. If you have questions about that, come see me and we'll go over it in more detail.
Okay. And then just a follow-up question on that. In terms of senior essay versus thesis for grad school competitive nature, would the senior thesis probably look a little better?
Yes, most definitely.
I feel there are some getting their research have to have at least, it looks like an academic year commitment to the lab. What opportunities are available to seniors now that they're not working fall quarter?
To some extent, it kind of depends on whether you're a 1-year senior or a 2-year senior. You know, if you're senior in terms of your class standing, but you plan to be here into the 17, no, we're in the 17, 18, 19, what? Academic year. The likelihood is much greater. I think, I don't know, you guys can chime in, but I think it's a little late for this academic year.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly try and email people and ask. I think people will be hesitant because, and the reason for this is just like I say, it's hard to be trained and it's hard to accomplish and get a good experience dropping by a few hours a week. It's also hard over just a few months. It really takes at least a year in the lab to get a feel for what's going on, both conceptually and the techniques, to learn the techniques, to be comfortable where you can work independently and then take on your own project and get some result out of it. I think another thing to think about is if you were going to be around in Santa Cruz following graduation, that could be something, you know, you can think about working either volunteer or as a paid position the following year. If you don't know what your next plans are yet, you can mention that in the email and give the impression that, you know, you could be here for a longer period of time. That might help.
You mentioned summer research programs. Where can you find out about these opportunities?
You mean on campus or
Yeah.
anywhere?
Well, I guess like on campus.
Summer research opportunities. One avenue that you can start with is through a program called STEM Diversity Programs. They are an office on campus that within them coordinates several research programs. I'll throw out some acronyms like IMSD, MARC, UC Leads, other programs. They have an application period between December and February. Your research experience would start in the summer. So if you're a graduating senior, you would not be eligible for this opportunity. If you're a junior or will be here an additional year, an additional senior year, then this can be. That's one avenue that exists on our campus. There's other research programs that take place in the summer at UCSC, but the way that they operate as they do on other campuses is they actually tend to attract, through the nature of their funding and other things, students from other campuses. So I mentioned like possibly going to another university, another college to do research over the summer. How do you find those? You can start with the database of the website that I told you about with the flyer. So check out what's there. Also through, let's see, like different organizations, like the National Science Foundation. There's a program called Research Experiences for Undergraduates, or REUs. If you know about another campus that does really good work in your major or studying what you're really passionate about studying, I'd say Google them, research them, find that out. If you come talk to me, I have a resource that I actually obtained from STEM Diversity Programs, which is just a long list of summer research programs. Talking to other students who may have done those opportunities, or faculty members who may know about them as well.
Another thing to think about, and I know unfortunately that this doesn't, everybody has different situations. Some people need to work full-time over the summer. If you don't need to work full-time over the summer, you don't really need to be in a formal program to do research. You can, when you write the professor now to try and get in the lab, make it known that you can be here in the summer and spend some time in the lab in the summer. Maybe, you can get by only working a part-time job and spend 20 hours a week at a part-time job, and then you can volunteer 20 hours in the lab. Maybe you're planning on being on campus anyway to take a summer course, and so you already, you're paying for your housing anyway. Definitely make that known. I think it's attractive to faculty for the reasons that I talked about before, to know that you'll be working in the lab during the summer. So I think, especially if you're a junior and you have this year and next year, having that summer in between, I think, is really important. I think if you're a sophomore and you have 2 potential summers left, not being here this summer but being there the following summer, I think is sufficient. So yeah, if you have the opportunity to volunteer over the summer, you can go ahead and do research and not necessarily be part of a formal program.
Just to add to that, these are great. The REUs, Research Experience for Undergraduates, there's many of these programs throughout the country, and these are heady summer programs. There's also SURF programs, Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowships, and I think these might be more generally NIH funded. So the two main, maybe not, but anyhow, but both the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health host and support financially a number of summer programs. And are we starting to catalog those, Justyn? Do you know? Different opportunities? Okay, because this would be a good thing, folks, and of course you mentioned you have a database. But in addition, so just one example is a woman who was in my 1A class, I think 2 years ago, applied directly to the National Institutes of Health. They have a program to go to Bethesda, Maryland, which is where the NIH campus is. So she'll be spending this upcoming summer doing research there. In addition, a current undergraduate in my lab, Ashley Wong, who is actually a BME major. So she's not a chemistry major, she's BME, but she's working in a chemistry laboratory. She spent this last summer at actually an industrial, at a biotechnology company. And I can't remember which one it was, but somewhere in the South San Francisco area, and getting great experience. But Genentech, Chiron, a number of these companies have summer programs as well. So, be adventurous, searching the web and looking around for all these different possibilities.
Sorry, what you said made me think of one more thing, and gets back to this point about potentially being too late to get into a lab during the middle of your senior year, is the National Institute of Health also, so if you're BMB, runs post-baccalaureate programs. So if you graduate, you have your undergraduate degree, you're still not sure whether you want to go to graduate school or not, you still want a research experience, different universities run programs where you go to them for the year, at least a year, sometimes 18 months following graduation, and you just work in the lab full-time and get a stipend for it.
Could you repeat that name one more time?
The NIH program, it's called PrEP. PrEP. It's a post, I forget what it stands for. It's a post-baccalaureate research, something.
And I think PrEP is actually, I think, one of the programs that STEM Diversity has on our campus as well. We have a PrEP program. Along the topic still of programs, the more formal ones that you apply to, just to put this on your radar, likely going to require essays or personal statements, letters of recommendation, 2 to 3 of those. Those are best to come from faculty. Transcripts, those types of materials. So that's something that you need to allow yourself time to work on and consult with, advisors, faculty, or myself on the content of your essays, for example, and whether you're putting your best foot forward in something like that. A resume or a CV might also be required.
How long does it generally take, if you're doing the senior essay, for the faculty sponsor to actually agree to look on to your to take you on, basically? Do you think it's a good idea to start looking a quarter before, maybe the week starting of that quarter, or when should we start, approaching the faculty member?
Yeah, there's no harm in doing that. Generally, the requests come in at the start of the quarter because it's a 1-quarter course. But yeah. Yeah, well, before the ad date, but deadline. But
I also recommend that you start earlier because a lot of students don't know what they want to write on. And if you approach faculty with no idea, as we heard before, you're going to get maybe a delete for your email. They're not going to tell you what topic to write on. So thinking about it early is always a good idea. So that way, if you are going to start winter quarter to approach any of the faculty, you already know what you want to write on. You've already done your research on the faculty to have those authentic conversations.
actually, that reminds faculty can get maxed out, so they may take 1 or more, but they might be full by the time you approach them. So, yeah, actually, it's a good idea to go early. Same for research.
Yeah, one thing I would add is whether you're writing faculty for senior essay or for research, just keep in mind that you have to have a really thick skin, that you're going to get a lot of non-responses, you're going to get a lot of no's, and often it doesn't have anything to do with you. It's not even that they don't think you're qualified enough. It's just either the lab is already full, the faculty is already sponsoring several people for senior essay, and so they'll just not respond if they're busy, or they'll write back and say no. So definitely don't just have one choice and be all in on that one choice. Look at faculty interests and make a list of several faculty, and then just go down your list and start writing to them, and don't be discouraged if you get a non-response or a no response. And if you get a non-response, don't feel timid about sending a follow-up. Right? You definitely have to be a little bit aggressive. You have to be a little bit pushy without being too annoying or inappropriate. It's kind of a fine line between being assertive and being annoying.
Yeah. And it never hurts to make a personal contact as well. So like I was mentioning earlier, getting to know your teaching assistants as a route to getting into a lab. But I think one of the most unusual is for a student, actually Ashley Wong again, who's in my lab right now. I was at Burbank Airport about to get on a plane, and she and I were in the same line, and she's like, Professor Millhauser, I was in your Chemistry 1A class. And we started talking, and she's been working in the lab now for, I think, 2 years, so you never know. Question over here.
I did have a question. How do research opportunities look like for students who are actually 8540 or DACA or cannot be sponsored by federal funds whatsoever? How do they go about that, and is there actually research opportunities for the students?
So as long as you're an enrolled student, none of the status, citizenship status plays any role whatsoever. So the same opportunities are open for DACA students as for anybody else. As far as funding goes, that I don't know. But again, like Seth pointed out, most of the positions for students working, especially if they're getting course credit, those are unpaid positions. You're volunteering, but it really shouldn't be a hurdle.
Yeah, so working in a lab during the academic year here on campus or during the summer on a volunteer basis, that wouldn't, factor in one way or another. As far as those summer opportunities at other campuses, it'll depend on where their funding comes from. I would imagine that if it is something, from a federally funded agency, that they have some sort of citizenship requirement for that. As far as other sources of funding, so I would imagine that the funding available from colleges on campus, divisions, departments, and the credit scholarship for sure is available to students regardless of their residency citizenship status.
The reason why I asked that, we have something called Pathways to Research. And
Yeah.
how that, but that's more geared towards like social science.
Yep, humanities and social sciences,
I was
yes.
wondering if they had that for something that.
So the closest, when I talk to students and give presentations, my two prime examples for programs on campus about research are Pathways to Research for humanities and social sciences and STEM diversity programs for STEM students. And STEM, their programs have sources of funding from federal agencies for sure, but I know they also fundraise. So they had their Giving Day project last year was to raise funds so that they could support undocumented students through summer research experiences, and so they do have some funding for that and continue to fundraise, and we'll probably do that again for Giving Day. So you're still eligible to apply for that. Yeah.
Is there a time of year that you know that you'll have space available in your lab for research? So if I'm a student and I want to approach you, like is spring a good time, like that you'll know if you'll have space in the summer or the following academic year?
Yeah, I would say if you forced me to pick a time, maybe spring is good because the undergrads who are working in the lab, some may be graduating, and then space will open up. But I would say email now, email again later. One thing, if the professor writes you back and says, sorry, I don't have space, you can write back and say, well, can I contact you again later this year? And then you can, go on and still try and find your position now. But in fact, usually when I write back to say, no, I don't have space, I'll usually say, feel free to contact me again later on this year. So, yeah, I guess email now and then email again later.
Earlier it was said that it's important to mention that you also have time, you'll be here in the summer. Do people care if you'll be here over winter break, or is that reserved for Christmas?
Usually we don't expect people to be here over Christmas. In fact, the building more or less shuts down. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The related topic is office hours. This varies from department to department, but is there an online list every quarter for when office hours are for the faculty?
There's not an online list.
Okay, so just having to contact them to find out individually when they have their hours.
We usually direct students to the faculty link that's on the website, chemistry.ucsc.edu. Click on faculty to learn more, and some faculty do have their office hours listed there.
Okay. Go ahead.
I kind of been asking for that question, at least for the chemistry classes, there's this syllabi for all the classes, and it seems to have the office hours.
So the answer to that was on the syllabus?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Due to the amount of courses that we have to take, we end up not having a lot of time to figure out what our specialization is if we don't know it already. How do you recommend us figuring out what we want to specialize and do in a research laboratory earlier if we end up taking like a classic or end of our junior year, we're like, oh, I really want to do physical chemistry. You wouldn't know that until the end of your junior year, and it's kind of too late by then because your first 2 years you were taking general chemistry and then just barely making your way to OCHEM.
I guess there's a couple answers to that. I mean, on the one hand, it's about getting the experience of working in a lab, not necessarily learning a specific technique. And it's very common for people to do undergraduate research in some area, some specialization, but then realize and go to graduate school for something else. So I'm an example of that. I did physical chemistry research as an undergrad, but then realized I wanted to do biochemistry by the time I graduated. And I don't regret not having done biochemistry at all. So I think one way to think of it is it's really just learning how to be in a lab, learning what it's like to do research, how to be a scientist, not like learning, how to work a laser in a physical chemistry lab. The other answer to that is it's not unheard of to switch labs. It's hard enough to get into one lab, so trying to switch and getting into another. But some people do it if you really feel really compelled to do it. If you realize the first lab just isn't for you, I think it is a possibility. You want to add?
Yeah, just to add to that, what Seth said exactly. Many of us did one thing as an undergraduate, another discipline as in graduate school, another one postdoc, and so forth. And that's part of science. That's intellectual curiosity. You move on. But there are, in addition to the websites, all the faculty websites, there's also, I know the chemistry department maintains like a little news release section. Okay, when somebody gets a big new grant, or they have a major paper published, or some exciting discovery that's written up in a newspaper somewhere, and you can browse that. And if something looks really exciting, that's a great lead to and an inroad to start talking with that faculty member or people in their laboratory. Let's see, your hand went up and we'll get to you. Yes.
Are there maybe any positions in labs that aren't necessarily research, like lab tech, or something that students could get into, like maybe help prepare solutions for like 1D or learning classes?
So in the, those are, boy, I don't know about those positions. Those are like, stockroom, work study positions. And I've seen students do that, but I really don't know what the pathway is to getting into that. Does anybody know?
I applied for and it was really crazy because I was one of 50 people that was interviewed for 3 spots. So.
Okay, so there you have your answer. It's challenging. Yes.
You're going to find those through the Career Center's student employment listing, the Slug Quest, yeah.
Check the employee request.
We have time for just a couple more questions.
Yeah, so I'm gonna come out with it. I'm a student with a learning disability, and I was working with an ecology postdoc, and he assigned me some tasks that I wasn't really capable of doing, like working on this massive Excel spreadsheet, and it was just work I couldn't do, and he couldn't accommodate for my disability. So what should I do? It really ruined my relationship with that postdoc, and I'm scared of applying for another lab because I'm worried that I won't be able to handle the work that they give me.
I've been here the longest, so Seth, pass me the microphone. I'm sorry that's happened to you. That's a very unfortunate situation. I guess what I would recommend is, can you have a discussion with the faculty member, because the postdoc is hired by the professor that's running the laboratory, and sometimes that individual can smooth things out and find sort of where things went astray and get things back on track.
Is it common for labs to accommodate, or is it am I kind of SOL?
No, I don't think you're SOL at all. I think it routinely happens, whether they're learning disability notwithstanding. I think there are many times where a graduate student, graduate students and postdocs, as you are learning to do research in a laboratory, they are learning to be mentors. And some of them are better at it than others. And you may have just hit on an unfortunate situation where the postdoc didn't really understand what would be a quality project for you. And so, as I say, if you talk with the faculty member, and I've seen this in other cases as well, where there's it just doesn't work out right. And usually the faculty member can get involved and find a more appropriate project that will be productive for the student involved, and perhaps a different mentor. The other place that you can get help, and Justyn can set me straight on this, would be the undergraduate advisor in your department to help mediate this. But it seems to me that this needs some discussion.
Any more questions? See two, these will be our last two.
Can you provide some examples of emails or interviews that stood out to you when considering undergraduate or joining your research team?
Well, I gave you an example earlier, and I would just, pardon me now? What's that?
What about first impressions when meeting one-to-one? What stood out to you?
Commitment and scholarship. You know, everybody's different. No, there's no one way that we hammer everybody into looking a certain way, acting a certain way to be a researcher. I can give you examples of professors that are anywhere from grunge all the way over to three-piece suit and tie every day. I mean, everybody's different. It's really your commitment, you know. And so I would just say be as professional as you can, be respectful, and show commitment to the research that you want to do, and make it clear to whoever you're interacting with, which whatever lab you're interested in, that it really is that laboratory. You've really thought about what's going on in that laboratory and why that's a good fit for you. Does that cover your question? Yes.
And it can't hurt to do some reading in advance of the area of the laboratory. So, for example, you could, when you exchange emails to set up the appointment, you could write back and say, hey, are there any papers either from your lab or a review paper in the area that I could read to prepare for the meeting? And then try and do some reading, and at least, you know, go to the meeting and say you've read this paper and you were interested in X, Y, and Z, and you had questions about A, B, and C. That's one way to show commitment, and it will prepare you to have a more engaging conversation. Because typically what happens at this meeting is, well, professors like to talk. And so the professor will probably describe to you some research projects that are going on in the lab. And if you've read a little bit in advance, it's easier for you to be a little bit more engaged in that discussion. What we really love is when we're talking and people start asking questions to show that you're listening and that you're engaged. And you might be a little bit nervous, so you know it might be hard to listen to everything, but having prepared a little bit, even start with just the website, of course. Usually you're going to be doing that before you contact the professor in the first place, but go back, read the website, and ask for suggestions about things that could be read.
Is there one more over here?
All right, thank you guys so much for your time. If you guys could give a hand to the professor.